Restoring Men in History, the battles of Lexington and Concord, very significant in history. Changed the world, I think. Historians think so as well. General Gage, Thomas Gage, in charge of Boston, and had the troops there. And what's he going to do? He's going to try to take the munitions away from the colonists so they can't cause him trouble and so that he can control them and do what he wants with them, right? And you see that through history. Tyrants, if they want to control you, try to do a couple of things. Now, what else he had done? He had suspended, they'd already had the Stamp Act, they'd had the Intolerable Acts, and now he was going around, before this happens, the battles of Lexington and Concord, he had been taking the stores of munitions away. So what do tyrants or people that want to control you usually want to do? And I think this is important for the Second Amendment. Now remember, he already suspended the legislature, taking away your right to representation. What else has he been doing? He doesn't even want them assembling in taverns, but what else is he going to do? He's been going around taking munitions from the colonists, trying to get that out of his way. Because what do tyrants and people that control you want to do? And why is the Second Amendment so important? The Second Amendment is so important because it gives you the ability to secure your rights, to protect your rights from tyrants, from governments that want to take your rights away. Because governments are meant to secure your rights, not take them away, right? Because your rights are not from government, they're from God, unalienable, right? Jefferson wrote that. So, Thomas Gage decides we're going to collect the munitions so they can't resist, and the British over there, they gave him, so they want that done too at Lexington and Concord. They said take action, take this. So we're going to read the account from nationalparkservice.gov. They got a lot of facts in here. I've read many different accounts, so I know it pretty well, but we'll give you the actual facts from nps.gov, and we'll add some things as we go through. But tyrants doing three things, right? Getting back to it. Your Second and First Amendment rights are so important. What's the First Amendment give you? The right to assembly, right? What else? The right to criticize your government. First Amendment in America, we have it. What do tyrants want to do? Take away your right to criticize them. Take away your right to own any guns and ammo. Right here, he's going to take your munitions, and you have to be careful about gun laws because what happens if you don't have ammo? If you don't have ammo, the guns are going to be pretty useless, right? And you'll see them incrementally taking more and more rights away. So let's get on to the piece. Tyrants through history, many of them want to take your right to criticize them away, your right to assembly, and just they take more and more rights. So I think this is a very important story about America and your rights. And these colonists wanted to fight for their rights, their homes, their wives, their children. A lot is on the line, and they have that spirit of liberty, okay? Now, General Gage was going to send a force of around 700 soldiers on a secret expedition, but remember, we have Paul Revere and Dawes into the countryside to seize and destroy arms and supplies and disrupt the colonists' warlike preparations. There's another guy, too, we've got, a doctor. His target was the town of Concord, 18 miles northwest of Boston. The expedition, now he picked the best guys. Thomas Gage wanted the best guys to go get these munitions. And remember, tyrants are going to do what? Try to take your arms and ammo. The expedition, that's why we always need to protect the Second Amendment and First Amendment. I think there's a lot of lessons here for men about the First and Second Amendment and how we need to protect it lawfully and peacefully. The expedition consisted of 21 companies of grenadiers and light infantry. Those were the great guys, the elite soldiers of the Army. This piece says grenadiers were chosen for their height and courage. They wore distinctive bear fur caps which add to their height and frightening appearance. Light infantry were chosen for their physical speed, stamina, and intelligence. They were trained to spread out, take advantage of cover, and skirmish with the enemy. And their uniforms were adapted to this. 12:30 a.m. Paul Revere and William Dawes arrive in Lexington. They warned Sam Adams and John Hancock. Now on the way back, well, what was this famous sign when they showed up there? The militia had been placed there to protect with standing guard, told him not to make so much noise. Revere replied, "You'll have noise enough before long. The regulars are coming." And now, a lot of people like to say the British are coming, that he said. He said the regulars are coming. They still considered themselves British. So he warned Adams and Hancock, Sam Adams that is. Revere and Dawes then determined on to Concord. Paul Revere was captured. Samuel Prescott carried the alarm to Concord, and the Lexington militia waits. Now here's a quote. Reverend William Emerson of Concord. "The morning between 1 and 2 o'clock, we were alarmed by the ringing of ye bell, and upon examination found that ye troops, to ye number of 800, had stole their march from Boston in boats and barges from ye bottom of ye common over to a point. The intelligence was brought to us at first by Samuel Prescott, who nearly escaped guard." All right, what does that tell you? Got a lot going on here. Back then they had community. They had friendships. and they had a network set up. They had created a warning system so that they could deal with the tyranny that was occurring, so they could protect their rights. Put this system in place. They had an intelligence network, a warning network put in place. They were assembling and meeting. So these guys were fairly prepared at this time. And that shows you how important what is. What are we missing today in America in a lot of cases that, according to the articles and points I read, community, relationships. Another point about relationships that made it work for Paul Revere. He had also hung lanterns. That's not in this piece. But I know the story. He had hung lanterns also as a warning. He had gotten put it up at the highest point, which was an Anglican church. But that Anglican church was run by a loyalist, and it was already closed. But what did Paul Revere have? He had a friend who allowed them to get into the church and put the lanterns up for the warning system. So they had multiple warning systems in place. So these patriots were prepared with these systems in place. All right, once the bells rung, Concord turned out its 2-minute companies and 2 militia companies, who mustered at the town center near the meeting house. Colonel James Barrett, who was responsible. He was the guy that was in charge of keeping the munitions, because the colonists knew they had to protect their munitions. So Second Amendment, again, coming back to the Second Amendment, so important that you have the ability as Americans to be able to secure your rights to own guns and ammos so that you can secure your rights and protect against tyrants, protect against people who would ignore the U.S. Constitution and try to take your property and rights, right? Lawfully and peacefully. All this needs to be done lawfully and peacefully. So, all right, this guy was in charge of safeguarding the stuff. Meanwhile, this guy, Captain Parker, have you heard of him? Famous guy. Read a lot of accounts of him. Meanwhile, in Lexington, Captain Parker dismissed his company with orders to be ready to assemble at the beating of the drum. All right, if he's going to beat that drum, be ready, guys. 2 a.m., British troops began their march to Concord. So we're kind of doing the timeline here. All right, 700 soldiers ferried across Charles River. That took 3 hours. Many of them were already cold and wet and miserable by the time they got there. Paul Revere walks back to Lexington. Thaddeus Bowman, who had been set out to scout the road, returned in haste to Lexington to warn Captain Parker that he'd spotted the British column just a half-mile away. Parker ordered the drums, Captain Parker. William Diamond beat to the arms. Militiamen hurried to the famous green, and they formed ranks. 5 a.m. First shots, Lexington Green. Shot heard round the world. You've probably heard that famous line, "This is it." This was the shot heard round the world. And it had a lot of meaning. We'll talk about that at the end. British light infantry had halted at Vine Brook, about a half mile from Lexington Green, in order to load their muskets. They then continued on. When they approached the Green, they discovered Captain Parker's company. About 77 men. I've heard also about 70. Someone somewhere fired a shot. Light infantry then rushed in the Green with bayonets, fired upon the retreating militia. 8 militiamen died. 10 others were wounded. Captain Parker then got his guys out of there, and he'll come back in the story, get them back in the fight in the afternoon. April 25th, Captain Parker ordered our militia to meet on the common ground, said Lexington to consult what to do, concluded not to be discovered, nor meddle or make with said regular troops if they should approach, unless they should insult us. And upon their sudden approach, I order our militia to disperse. So he did that according to the accounts I've read. And not to fire. Immediately, troops made their appearance, rushed furiously, fired upon us, and killed 8 of our party. So that's his take. All right, Minutemen and militia continued to gather in Concord at 6 a.m. That warning system is working. More and more people are gathering. Militia are coming through. What does that show you? The spirit of the colonist, the community of the colonist, that they love their homes and country. They're coming together. I think community is important. It kind of alarms me that we've lost some of it. All right, the alarm had been spreading all morning. Minute and militia companies continued to arrive in Concord. Concord's 2-minute companies and 2 militia companies were soon joined by companies from Lincoln. British entered Concord. Thaddeus Blood, a private in Captain Nathan Barrett's company, was among the advance party that marched about a mile east from the center of town. There they saw the column. 700 strong British soldiers marching toward them. Blood described this scene as this: we were then formed, the Minutemen on the right and Captain Barrett's militia company on the left, marched in order, end of Merriam's Hill, so then called and saw British troops coming down Brooks Hill. The sun was arising and shined on their arms, and they made a noble appearance in their red coats and glistening arms. Can you imagine that? That's got to be scary, right? Seeing all those guys glistening in the sun coming upon you, but colonists and the militia and the Minutemen would stand. 7:30 a.m. British light infantry secure the North Bridge and march to the Barrett Farm. Regulars entered Concord. The militia was outnumbered by 3-1. They retreated back the ridge toward the town, then over the North Bridge to a hill. They waited for reinforcements. British moved to secure the North and South bridges. General Gage, in his orders, had said to take control of the two bridges in town. 8 a.m. British searched the Barrett Farm. So Colonel James Barrett, at age 65, had been the guy responsible for protecting the munitions of the colonial forces, all right? And they went over there to take a look. The family had been up early. Colonel Barrett's wife, Rebecca, and other members were home when Captain Parsons, British captain, arrived with a column of 120 light infantry soldiers. She served them breakfast while they searched the house. They didn't find anything, so they successfully had hidden everything. Very important. Again, this Second Amendment, going back to it, and the First Amendment is so important to our rights here. So important to be able to defend ourselves against tyranny. And that's what the Second Amendment's for, to be able to defend yourself against tyrants. 9 a.m., colonial officers make the decision to advance to the North Bridge. Minutemen and militia advanced to the hill to a field on high ground overlooking the North Bridge. With additional companies from Bedford and Acton, their numbers now exceeded 400 men. So now we got 400 guys. The British companies left to guard the bridge were still on the same side. Both the British and colonists were content to stay where they were. The colonial soldiers assumed the worst. They saw smoke rising. They thought the British were burning the town. That really wasn't occurring, but they thought so. So, Lieutenant Joseph Hosmer, Concord officer, exclaimed to his superiors, "Will you let them burn the town down?" The decision was made to march to the North Bridge and engage the British soldiers there. Colonel Barrett issued a firm order, you probably heard this, do not fire unless first fired upon. With that, the column of over 400 men marched down the road. 9:30 a.m., Battle of the North Bridge. When the British first deployed to the North Bridge, they were positioned on the west side of the river. They were outnumbered at this point by the militia. British soldiers pulled back as the colonials pushed forward to within about 80 yards. Shots rang out from the British side, landed in the river. Luther Blanchard said that he was wounded and he cried out. Major John Buddock of Concord then gave the fateful order, here you go, fire, for God's sake, fire. Significant. This was the first time colonial militiamen had fired on British soldiers. Historical. 12 British soldiers were hit, 3 of them fatally. 4 of 8 officers were wounded. The rest of the British soldiers broke and fell back in disorder toward Concord. That's winning. That's American troops driving them back. Significant. 11 a.m., British troops returned from the Barrett Farm. The Minutemen and militia decided not to hold the bridge. Instead, they posted themselves on the hill. Is this a mistake? What do you think? Overlooking the road from the Barrett Farm. Thus, instead of being cut off, Captain Parsons and his 120 men were able to get out and rejoin the main body. So, didn't secure that bridge. 12:30 p.m., skirmish at Merriam's Corner. So far, there have been fighting at Lexington Green, where the first colonialists were killed at 5 a.m., remember that. Then Concord's North Bridge, where the British soldiers died at around 9:30 a.m. Now, the situation was going to get much worse for the British. Guys were coming from all around. Militia, the system was working. And the spirit of Americans was there. They were gathering. They were ready to fight the British and harass them and attack them. They were attacked by newly arrived minute and militia companies from Reading and all these other places. The British had to pull their flank guard across a brook. This is the action of what became known as Battle Road. They harassed them all the way back to Boston. It was amazing. 1 p.m., let's go on to 1:45 because Parker comes back here. Parker's revenge. So Parker gets back. First shots of the American Revolution occurred roughly at 5:30. We talked about that. Mid-morning, Captain Parker collected the shattered company. They marched west toward Concord for the purpose of getting back in the fight. Captain Parker wants back in. They choose a place very close. They picked a great spot, close to the town of Lincoln on rising ground overlooking the road. And they picked a spot that the British were going to have to go through a bridge. And it was a narrow bridge. The ground chosen by his men, Parker's men, the company, was wooded, strewn with large boulders. So what did they have? They had fantastic cover. When the advance guard of the British column crossed, Parker's men lit them up. They opened fire. 2:15 p.m. was Fiskkill. Again, using tree lots, stone walls. Again, they were fighting very intelligently and using cover. Piles of rail fence and boulders. Colonial militia staged themselves around Bay Road. Quote, reading Minuteman Edmund Foster recalled, the enemy were then rising and passing over Fistkill. An officer mounted on an elegant horse with a drawn sword in his hand was riding backwards and forwards, commanding. A number of Americans behind a pile of rails raised their guns and fired with deadly effect. The officer fell, horse took fright. So they are harassing them all the way here. All right, 3 p.m., British reinforcements arrive at Lexington. Through a tragedy of errors, Hugh Earl Percy did not leave Boston until 9 a.m. Lieutenant John Barker recounts, the country was an amazing strong one, full of hills, woods, stone walls, which the rebels did not fail to take advantage of, for they were all lined with people who kept an incessant fire upon us. Imagine yourselves there. And we did too upon them, but not with the same advantage, for they were so concealed, there was hardly any seeing them. So the British couldn't see our guys. And this way we marched between 9 and 10 miles. Imagine that. For 9 and 10 miles, they were shot at like this. The numbers increasing from all parts was reducing by deaths, wounds, fatigue. We were totally surrounded. Imagine that feeling of being totally surrounded by an incessant fire and just constant fire. And it's impossible to conceive. Our ammunition was nearly expended. Imagine that. 3:30 p.m., Percy's brigade resumes the march to Boston. They rested a little bit to tend the wounded, Monroe and Tavern. So at 3 p.m., General William Heath and Dr. Joseph Warren join the fight, first of all. General William Heath and Dr. Joseph Warren join the fight, so they're getting more forces now. 3:30, Percy's brigade resumes the march to Boston. They let them rest, they treat the wounded. And now under command of Hugh Earl Percy, they resumed their march. With the addition of 1st Brigade, the column was now more than 1,600 strong. But Smith's exhausted soldiers were placed at the head, fresh troops at the back. One guy wrote, our regiment received orders to form the rear guard. We were fired at from all quarters, particularly from the houses on the roadside. So they are being shot at from everywhere. Imagine what these British regulars are imagining and feeling at the time. 5:30, there was a slaughter at Jason Russell House. We won't cover that. 6:30 p.m., Percy takes the road to Charlestown. British column was nearly spent. They were exhausted. Ammunition was running low. Hugh Earl Percy knew he had to reach safety soon or his column would be cut off. That's how close it was. Suspecting that the bridge in Cambridge was held against it, Percy took the road to Charlestown. That was a brilliant move, it says. Saved many lives. Now, at 7 p.m., a narrow escape at Prospect Hill. Now, just as the column was approaching Charlestown neck and safely, General Heath wrote, at this instant, an officer on a horseback came up from the Medford Road and inquired circumstances of the enemy, adding that about 700 men were close behind. Had these, General Heath writes this, arrived a few minutes sooner, the left flank of the British must have been greatly exposed and suffered. Perhaps their retreat would have been cut off. That's General Heath. A few minutes, missed it. 7:30 p.m., the battle ended. When the British column crossed Charlestown Neck and was able to take a good defensive position, the engagement came to the end. British casualties were this: 73 killed, 174 wounded, 26 missing. Colonial casualties, 49 killed, 41 wounded, 5 missing. Now, I'm going to read this quote of Percy, and I think it'll sum up the battle and the change, because this created a change. These were significant battles for Americans. Whomever looks upon them as an irregular mob will find himself much mistaken. Up until this, the British looked upon Americans, and even some after this, as just a mob. They have men amongst them who know very well what they're about. What does it mean? Americans had the spirit. They knew how to maneuver and get around the woods, but they had that spirit. They know what they're about. They had a big why, and I think you need a big why in life. You may depend upon it, that as the rebels have now had time to prepare, they are determined to go through with it. So he's learning. The colonists are ready to go through with this. Nor will the insurrection here turn out so despicable as it is perhaps imagined at home. He says you got it all wrong back there. These guys are going to fight. For my part, I've never imagined they would have attacked the king's troops. So this was a shock to him, shock to Britons. It was called the shot heard around the world. What did it do? Well, here's what I think it did, and here's what many historians think it did. Many historians believe morale was built up from these battles. What did it show? Well, we had harassed them. We made British regulars retreat. That's a big deal. This is the British Empire. We're just farmers and a bunch of people, right? But they made them retreat. What did it show us? What did it show the spirit of the soldiers there, the militiamen, the minutemen? We could hold our own with the British. That's what it showed them. It raised their confidence. And you know in life, men, confidence is very important. You don't want arrogance, you want confidence, right? And it had raised the spirit and confidence of the soldiers. Now, we had a spirit of liberty. We had a big white. And you can understand from this story the importance today of your Second and your First Amendment. What were they trying to cut off? What are tyrants and big governments that want to control you, just control you and take away your rights, want to usually do? Take away your right to assembly. Take your rights away to criticize certain people or the government that they don't want you to criticize. Control your speech. And what else? Take your ammunition. Pass the laws that take bits and pieces of your ammunition, your stocks, or whatever it is, so that you can't stand for your natural rights, for your unalienable rights. Government's meant to secure your rights. And it doesn't come, your rights do not come from government. Government got a little bit of power from the states and the people, right? Our federal government. So at this time, you learn a lot from this story, and the men had perseverance, they had courage. But they showed they could stand toe-to-toe with the British and make them retreat. But it also shows you how important the Second and First Amendment are. Thank you.